Right here live.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It is a little bit after 3 o'clock. And we are picking up our last agenda item of the day for committee work, which is H 686. An act relating to expanding identification of certain lobbying advertisements. And we are joined by the bill's lead sponsor, Representative Sevilla. Hi, Representative.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, and committee. Thank you very much for giving me time to come in. I'm here to introduce H 686, which proposes a targeted update, very small, to VSA 264C. And that is the section of statute that governs identification and reporting of certain types of paid lobbying advertisements. Under current law, Vermont's disclosure requirements for paid lobbying ads apply only during the legislative session. In practice, that has created a loophole. In election years, well-funded national advocacy organizations to the left and to the right, and right down the center, are able to spend significant money outside of the session on paid advertisements that are intended to influence public opinion about candidates and policy positions without any kind of public reporting. And that kind of off-session spending is often not neutral. It is designed to influence elections and legislative outcomes and avoid campaign finance disclosure and existing lobbying transparency rules. And where there is a loophole, why wouldn't folks, if it's there to be used, why wouldn't folks use it? So H 686 closes that loophole, and I will note it does not limit speech, advocacy, or political participation. It does not prohibit advertising. It very simply extends the existing identification and reporting requirements that are in VSA 264C year round, so that when paid lobbying advertisements are used influence elections or legislative action, Vermonters can clearly see who is paying for those ads, regardless of whether the legislature is formally in session. Here is an example of the gap that 686 addresses. In an election year, an organization that employed lobbyists in Vermont purchases paid digital and mail advertisements in September and October. The ads criticize or praise sitting legislators and legislative candidates. They frame policy debates and urge voters to hold officials accountable. This messaging is clearly intended to influence future legislative action and election outcomes. Because the legislature is not in session at that time, these ads are not required to identify who paid for them under current law. And even though the same organization would be required to disclose that information, if the ads ran during the legislative session, they'd be required to report it. As a result, voters see the message. Sometimes they see who is sending the message, but there's not really any public reporting about the fact that this is happening. The spending avoids campaign finance reporting and avoids lobbying disclosure, even though it is designed to affect both. So this H 686 would not stop that example from happening. Those ads could still run. It just would require the same basic transparency year round, so that Vermonters can evaluate political messages with full information about who is behind them. And that, Mr. Chair, is my testimony.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You and I have spoken outside of the formal committee environment on this bill. I feel like I'm pretty well versed on our intent here, so I don't have any questions for you at the moment. Hang
I just want an example. So if a postcard came in the mail and it said, this candidate is doing this or not doing this, and at the bottom, there would be a disclosure that says paid for by X.
So my understanding, if you're naming specific candidates, that you're into the campaign finance section of law. So this is more in the lobbying advertising aspect. So a lobbyist here could so we could, let me think about an example here. So we could have here's one. During the session, VPIRG, registered lobbyists here in the building. We have a public question in front of us in the past on the bottle bill. So during the session, if they were to send out advertisements or pay for advertisements to Vermonters advocating for the bottle bill, they would have to report that as part of their lobbying disclosure. However, when the session ends in May, if they, let's say it's an election year, okay? We get into July or August or September, and now VPIRG is sending out these advertisements and they're telling Vermonters, so many of these candidates, are just destroying our landfills or whatever the case might be. And you've got to hold them accountable just on the question, the concept, but we're not talking about individual candidates. Right now, they would not have to provide any reporting about the amount that they're spending on that. And if we were in session, they would have to provide reporting on the amount that they're spending on that. So why should we leave that loophole? But why should they not have to report? And, in campaign finance, I think this is kind of venturing into that place, but rather than really getting overcomplicated, let's just stop that loop. Is that helpful, Rep. Hango?
I think so. So not specific candidates, but specific questions or issues that are out there. How does this, I'm going to go a little bit further. How does this affect other elections besides the one we hold in November for state reps, senators? Would it affect lobbying efforts around town elections like that happen on town meeting day on public questions?
So I think elections is a potential effect. It's not really the problem that we're correcting. So the problem that we're correcting is really around reporting and transparency, right? So these advertisements can have the effect of impacting an election or an incoming legislative session, right? So if it's happening in the middle of a biennium. So it's less about, it's more about the fact that we have lobbyists, lobbyists that are buying ads to influence opinion. We as legislators say, well, when that's happening during the legislative sessions, we want them reporting on how much money they're spending. People should know, we should know who's doing it. This just said, well, we should actually know year round.
And I shouldn't have said town meeting because that's during the legislative session.
So I think it could be any number of different types of questions or ads or just opinions that are out there, but if it's a registered lobbying entity in the state, why wouldn't we want them to just follow the same rules year round?
Thank you.
And like special interest groups, like things of that nature, like C3s, C4s, does that fall into this bucket? That's a better question for council.
Mr. Chair, I think it is. Oh, he's.
So we'll wait for council on that. Yeah. Any other hands for Representative Savili? Oh, that's just Bob Street touching his beard. Okay, so I guess we'll shift over to council right now and ask a couple more questions after a quick chat with him. Do you want to stay with us while we do this? Or do you wanna-
I'd be happy to. If that was a request.
Yeah, that was an offer.
Please stay.
Thank you for having me back, committee. For the record, Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you, you have H 686, an act relating to expanding identification of certain lobbying advertisements. And it is all relative things, relatively simple amendment and simple bill. Insofar as it removes the kind of time constraints on when lobbying advertisements necessarily have to be follow identification and then subsequently reporting requirements for that. So current law says that they need to be identified during, prior to final adjournment of the biennial or adjournment legislative session. This removes that. So therefore, meaning they would be at any time. The identification, and then of course, what's not listed here is the following reporting requirements there. I'm just going to stop there, leave it open for questions. I can speak more broadly about authority to regulate lobbying or the difference between campaign finance and lobbying regulations. Happy to.
Yeah, Rep. Hago.
I guess I'd like certain lobbying advertisements defined, if that's possible, because I can think of some off-session things, like somebody buys a sign to put up at a lobbyist buys a sign to put up at a golf tournament. Is that advertisement?
So I regret not including the rest of the statutory language because there's a definition provision at the very bottom,
Oh,
which defines advertisement and advertising campaign. For the committee's awareness, advertisement means a notice that appears in any of the following public media: radio, television, newspapers, or other periodicals or internet websites. Advertising campaign means advertisements substantially similar in nature regarding regardless of the media in which they are placed. And then I should say the advertisements are qualified by the language following in A1, so that the advertisement, now we know the media it exists in, has to be intended, designed, or calculated to influence legislative action or to solicit others to influence legislative action by whoever the recipient of the advertisement is, seeing it, hearing, etc. And that is made at any time. Okay. So again, this has to be in effort to influence legislative action, and that's rightfully distinguished from electing certain individuals to office or advocating for or against public questions, things being like,
great.
we went over this earlier.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so like a mailer by a lobbying entity trying a issue of the day and a position on it. Things of that nature.
Sure. Could be, it's like, vote this way or that on Bill X. Could be something more nebulous, I think, too, as far as, that is items that are actively in front or being considered by legislators and that they're taking action on. This operative word here. Although I suppose it is brought up also to include things that maybe the legislature is likely to take up, or this is intended to motivate them to take something up too. So it's a broad range of speech. It falls within the regulatable sphere of speech.
Attempts to influence the outcomes of policy decision-making process. Yes.
And I should further state to Representative Hago's earlier question, term lobbying or lobbyist, they're all defined in different statutory sections, same chapter. This is in Title II Legislature. Chapter 11 has to do with the registration and conduct of lobbyists as well. And there we find, gifts, limitations on those, what is a lobbying firm, what is a lobbyist, what is lobbying, what is a lobbyist. And happy to read any of those into the records. Those are in 2 VSA 261, particular definitions.
I'm gonna be conscious of the clock because we gotta be on the floor in 7 minutes. And travel time and all. So do we have any further questions for Mr. Devlin right now? I think that cleared a couple of things up. Okay. This is something I understand the intent behind it, so I'm open to taking a little bit more testimony on this. To get into the broader landscape of the as to why it was introduced. So that's just my thought on this one. Like I cited earlier, I had the opportunity to speak with them. Lead sponsor of the bill a couple of times on this, so. But noodle on it as yourselves as individuals. And let me know, or to know if you have any questions, but I'd like to take a couple of pokes at this.
And I should just say, if anybody has any questions about exactly what degree state government can regulate political speech, speech in general, happy to provide a more detailed analysis if you want.
Wonderful. All right. Last call for hands. You see none. All right. Thank you, council. Thank you, committee. That was a lot of time at this table today.
That was.
So good work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You can take us off, Nick.